Welcome to Uotobi BG-curous person channel. Let's listen and immerse yourself in the world of knowledge, emotions and timeless stories. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any works and products from BG-curous person. Once upon a time, in a small village hidden amidst lush green hills and the pure air of nature, there lived a young man named Van Hoang, one whom everyone in the village visited not only because of his gentle nature but also because of a mind filled with toxicity and restlessness. Although blessed with talent, Van Hoang was constantly swept up in an endless spiral of thoughts, worries about the past, and fears of the future. In his mind, it was as if a tangled labyrinth had taken hold, and not for a single moment did he feel at peace. Every morning, as the gentle light of dawn brushed over each blade of grass, Van Hoang awoke only to find his mind once again inundated with worries. Will I fulfill my responsibilities today? Will the sorrowful memories of yesterday rob me of my confidence? Or will the future remain as vague and dark as vast black clouds? These thoughts flowed ceaselessly like a surging river, making him feel as though he was sinking into an overwhelming tide. One day, while wandering through the narrow lanes of his village, Van Hoang encountered a group of elderly villagers gathered beside an old wooden fence. They whispered about a famous sage, a spiritual master who had lived in seclusion on a distant high peak. According to the villagers, this sage possessed the secret to liberating one's soul and finding inner tranquility, something that Van Hoang had long yearned for but had never been able to grasp. Driven by curiosity and a deep longing to rediscover himself, he decided to leave behind the familiar comforts of his countryside and embark on a journey in search of wisdom and lasting peace. The journey upward was not an easy one. Van Hoang traversed rugged dirt roads and wandered through dense forests by babbling streams, where the chirping of birds intermittently mixed with the rustling of leaves in the wind. Every step, every passing moment, was a precious lesson, yet also a confrontation with the very limits of his body. Though weariness pressed upon him, the hope of finding answers to his burning inner questions only grew stronger. After many days of wandering, Van Hoang finally set foot on the towering mountain peak, where, according to legend, the sage lived in absolute tranquility. Upon reaching the summit, in an atmosphere of extraordinary serenity, he discovered a small, beautiful garden, carefully tended with beds of flowers in every vibrant hue. In the midst of the garden, a modest wooden dwelling stood open like a door leading into another world, a world of stillness. Inside that dwelling, seated on a low chair, the sage, with silvery hair and sparkling, wise eyes, was deeply immersed in meditation. Van Hoang approached, bowed respectfully, and began, "Teacher, quote." The sage slowly opened his eyes, his gaze as gentle as a cool stream, and smiled as he replied, "Empty your mind." Then the master led Van Hoang out of the dwelling, walking along narrow corridors until they stopped before a small courtyard, meticulously adorned with blossoms and neatly arranged plants. In the center of the courtyard stood a large stone basin, exquisitely carved and filled to the brim with water. "Please help me," the master began, instructing him to complete a task. Van Hoang looked around and pondered. The task, though it appeared simple, was far from easy since the small bowl placed nearby could not possibly contain all the water from the basin. Nevertheless, with deep respect and faith in his teacher's words, he accepted the challenge and set to work. At first, he used a small ladle to scoop water from the basin and transfer it into the small bowl. Initially, he proceeded carefully, yet, as he strove for perfection, water began splashing everywhere, and his heart grew even more troubled. Time passed, and the moments spent transferring the water seemed to stretch on endlessly. Van Hoang grew tired, his hands trembling under the pressure of the task. The more water he scooped, the more his mind became crowded with thoughts. Why can't I do this? Am I overthinking? Are all my efforts truly meaningful? These self-directed questions flooded in, deepening his inner turmoil. In the midst of his confusion and despair, the sage stepped to his side, gently placing a hand on Van Hoang's shoulder, and said in a soft voice, "My child." Van Hoang looked up at his teacher, his eyes a mix of confusion and hopeful expectation, and asked, "Teacher, how can I?" With a gentle, knowing smile, the master replied, "You must let go." The sage's words were like a key unlocking the door to Van Hoang's soul. He took a deep breath, feeling relief spread through every cell, and decided to change his approach. Instead of forcing himself to scoop the water in a rigid manner, Van Hoang began to listen to the gentle murmur of the flowing water, to savor the melodious sound of each drop, and to enjoy the cool sensation as the water touched his skin. As each moment passed, Van Hoang gradually entered a meditative state, where all thoughts and worries melted away like mist under the morning sun. Each ladleful of water transferred from the basin to the small bowl was no longer a challenge but became part of a harmonious process between man and nature. He realized that when his mind became clear and serene, every task flowed effortlessly, as smoothly as a gentle stream. In working through the task, Van Hoang recognized that his relentless efforts to force himself beyond the limits of his thoughts only led to further inner chaos. He began to understand that true tranquility does not come from achieving something grand but from the ability to let go, from the art of living fully in the present moment. The more he focused on the feeling of each breath, the sound of nature around him, the deeper his connection with the vast universe grew. Gradually, the stone basin, once brimming with water, seemed to yield in harmony with the rhythm of Van Hoang's soul. The water began to flow into the small bowl naturally, no longer burdened by the pressure of worry or fear. Finally, after a long period of careful effort and inner struggle, the basin slowly emptied, and the small bowl reached its capacity. In that moment, Van Hoang felt a miraculous transformation within his soul. The sage looked at him gently, his eyes filled with pride and compassion, and said, "My child, you see." The teacher's words, like a cool stream, soothed his soul, washing away all his sorrows and worries. Van Hoang no longer felt restless or trapped by the past or anxious about the future. He came to understand that peace resided within him, waiting to be discovered. Returning to his beloved village, Van Hoang carried with him the invaluable lesson imparted by the sage. He began to change his way of life, learning to listen to his inner voice and to seek serenity in even the smallest of actions. Whenever someone sought advice from him, he would recount the story of the stone basin and the small bowl, symbols of emptiness and the power of letting go of what no longer serves us. Before long, the villagers began to notice the transformation in Van Hoang. He was no longer the man who constantly fretted over the past or the future. Instead, he had become calm, understanding, and eager to share the joy of being present with everyone. His stories were not only lessons in tranquility but also living proof of the power of savoring every moment. Gradually, people began to follow his example, seeking the inner peace that united them and forming a community filled with warmth and understanding. Over time, the tale of Van Hoang and the sage became a legend in the village. Every evening, as the sun set behind the green hills, the villagers would gather, converse, and share their own thoughts, knowing that in that silence and stillness they had found their way. With eyes shining like stars in the night, Van Hoang came to understand that life was not a series of insurmountable challenges to overcome, but rather a journey in search of harmony between oneself and the universe. He learned that by letting go of all unnecessary attachments and worries, one could perceive the hidden beauty of life, from the gentle breeze through one's hair to the laughter of children echoing throughout the village. Thus, Van Hoang's lesson of calming the mind became a beacon for many, reminding everyone that by learning to let go, we can discover gentle serenity within ourselves. Just as the once full stone basin becomes empty, each of us can become light and clear when we release negative thoughts, allowing the universe of love and happiness to flow through us. Looking back on his long journey, Van Hoang released the burdens of his past, the long days mired in worry and the sleepless nights consumed by anxiety. He understood that every experience, every pain, and every drop of water had taught him to love life more deeply. For it was through learning to calm the mind that he realized what matters is not how much we accumulate, but knowing how to let go. With this change, Van Hoang gradually became an inspiration to the young people of the village. He not only taught them how to master their minds but also encouraged everyone to live in the present, to cherish every moment as a precious gift. The discussions, the stories shared around the campfire, or even the simplest intimate conversations between people, all carried a profound message about seeking inner peace. And so, the story of the young man who sought tranquility through the stone basin and the small bowl spread far and wide throughout the countryside. Far beyond the borders of that tiny village, no matter where they were or what their circumstances, everyone who heard this story felt as if their hearts were opened, as if a cool breeze had swept away all their sorrows. Over time, those who embraced this lesson came to know that there is no simpler secret than living fully in every moment, listening deeply and feeling sincerely. For only when our minds are at peace can we hear nature's call, feel the heartbeat of life, and thereby discover the path to true happiness. The sage, whom Van Hoang had met on that distant peak, continued to live in that sacred place, ever receiving and imparting invaluable lessons to those with gentle hearts. He never forced anyone but instead gently urged each person to discover their own answers by listening to their inner voice. As he would say, when you learn to calm your mind, you will receive. After returning from his arduous journey, Van Hoang went on to live a life far more meaningful than ever before. He realized that every challenge, whether small or great, was a step toward the maturation of his inner self. Each night, when the moonlight peeked through the window, He would sit with a cup of hot tea and reflect on his journey towards serenity, a journey that had transformed him. The villagers gradually changed too. They began to adopt Van Hoang's way of life, letting go of petty conflicts and coming together with genuine love. Every corner of the village, from the humble houses to the red dirt roads, seemed to be infused with a fresh breeze of tranquility and a renewed faith in a simple yet meaningful life. The story of Van Hoang and the sage was not merely an individual's tale. It served as a reminder that within each of us lies an invaluable treasure, our inner self. When we learn to let go and calm our minds, we discover that everything around us can become harmoniously beautiful. This, indeed, is the secret to living a life that not only endures but shines like stars scattered across the sky. Thus, Van Hoang's story became a melodious ode to the freedom of the soul, a lesson in how one can merge with the flow of life without being swept away by chaos and worry. Whenever someone felt tired, lost, or overwhelmed by life's burdens, they would remember the stone basin, the small bowl, and the lesson of the sage. Over the years, the legend of Van Hoang's quest for serenity was passed down through many generations. It was not only a tale of enlightenment but also a symbol of faith and hope for a brighter future, a future in which every person could find their own light, even if life sometimes raged like a storm. Today, when we look back on Van Hoang's journey, we realize that life is never simply a series of meaningless hardships. Every experience, even the smallest challenge, contributes to a magnificent tapestry of the soul. Every peaceful moment with the stone basin was not merely a simple act, but a manifestation of the deep connection between humanity and nature, of persistence, and of creative imagination. Finally, the lesson that Van Hoang brought back from his long journey became a guiding principle for not only his own life but for countless others seeking inner peace amid the burdens of everyday existence. It serves as a reminder that when we learn to calm our minds and let go of that which no longer serves our growth, life opens new doors, leading us into a world filled with love. With that lesson, the story, Empty Your Mind, remains a constant source of inspiration for all those on the path to inner peace and happiness. Remember that each of us can master our own lives by learning to let go, by pausing, and by living fully in every present moment, for that is the key to a fulfilling and abundant life. I hope this English translation faithfully conveys the spirit and depth of the original.